Hi, everyone. Welcome to Save the Date, your dating survival guide from Coffee Meets Bagel. I'm Down, your host and CMB's Chief Dating Officer. Each episode, I invite a dating expert to explore what it takes to go on great dates and ultimately find a great relationship. Today, I am so excited to have the perfect expert to tackle the subject of sex. Sex is a really exciting subject, but it's also sensitive and it makes us feel nervous. It definitely makes me feel nervous. And especially when we're trying to broach the subject for the first time to our dates, that makes it really, really difficult. If I'm honest, I was never good at it when I was dating. And even now, I've been in a relationship for a few years with my partner, and it makes me uncomfortable to talk about sex with my partner. So that is why I am so excited to have Shadeen Francis here with me today to help us learn how we can approach the topic of sex with confidence and comfort. Shadeen Francis is a licensed psychotherapist, media personality, graduate professor, and author whose expertise span the domain of sex therapy, emotional intelligence, and social justice. She has been featured on many platforms like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and the New York Times to share her unique perspective. Welcome, Shadeen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to have you here. This is the first time we're actually talking about the topic of sex, so I'm just really exciting.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I'm glad to be the first.
Yeah, and you're the perfect expert to have you have us help us learn to be better at talking about sex. So let's start with the basics. A lot of our listeners are daters. We're not in a relationship yet, and so when we're starting to just date someone like fairly new, when is the right time to talk about sex?
So while there's not like a universal formula because everyone's situation is going to be different, everyone's looking for different things out of dating. People are dating different people. Ideally, you talk about sex before you have it.
Mm-hmm.
Is my general rule of thumb. I know lots of folks like to just sort of see what happens, and if that's your style, go ahead. However, from my vantage point with the work that I do, conversation is part of the key to having great experiences.
Mm.
I think that we assume that because we have maybe had sex before, we feel really confident in our sexual skills. Maybe we even know a lot about our bodies, but without the conversation, all we're doing is running off of assumptions that you like what other people like, assuming that you understand what I'm going to like, assuming that we are both looking for the same things or enjoying the same things. Right? Assuming that I understand you well enough to be able to like read your body language or tell what certain things mean or feel like, right? So ideally, before you start having sex, you
Yeah,
start to
that
talk a little bit about sex.
Yeah, that's such a great point because even if you have a lot of experience, if sex is unique and personal, so it means a different things to different people. We all, like you said, we have different preferences. So if we're not actually talking about it, then yeah, we are assuming a lot of things probably on the other partner. Um, and I think there's a lot of sometimes there's some expectation as to sex has to happen by certain number of dates,
Mm.
like. But I think what you were saying in the very beginning is that it really depends on the
Yeah,
person.
absolutely. It absolutely depends. It depends on everybody's comfort, and we're in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of a pandemic in this moment. So it depends on people's assessment of risk, right? And what they need to do in terms of their own feelings of safety in regards to that particular virus, other kinds of health and safety, right? Availability, like maybe I would totally have sex with you, but my kids are home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
so many things. Maybe I would, but like I have a cold or
Right.
I'm menstruating and that's not the time when I want to be having sex, or
Yeah.
I don't know, I didn't brush my teeth this afternoon and I'm feeling, self-conscious about it, like whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
right? That it is totally dependent. Some
Yeah.
folks really want like a deep, intimate connection before being sexual with someone. And
Mm-hmm.
someone's like, I don't want to bother building a deep, intimate connection with you if I haven't experienced you sexually yet.
Right.
So everybody's experience is going to be different. And so that's why it's really important as you're getting to know people, to have some conversations about like, what are you into? What is fun for you?
Yeah.
How will we know when the moment is right? Are you a spontaneous sort of person, or are you a person who likes to plan it? Are there
Yeah.
any like no-go zones? Like what would
Yeah.
be like a hard, like, ugh, versus like what's a big turn on, right? Like there's so many different things that we can ask.
Yeah. Those are some really important and also just fun topic to talk about. And I think the conversation itself builds intimacy. Are there topics about sex that you really recommend, like you strongly recommend that we definitely address before having sex?
Yeah, absolutely. I really encourage people to talk about their yeses and nos
Mm,
up front, kind of as a part of like the introduction to the conversation. I think that when I use the word boundaries, the first thing people hear is like, stop. Right? And while they can be that, boundaries are your yes and your no, right? So
Mhm.
not just the all the no-go zones, but also all of the openings, all of the entry points. And as a sex therapist, I get lots of people who will reach out to me and say, like, I don't know, how to get what I want, from my partner. I don't know how to introduce this. I don't know how to share this, right? Or we've been together for X period of time and the sex isn't really what I want. It's
Mm,
important for us to build a practice of naming what feels good, right?
mm,
Of naming what we like, of
mm.
sharing with other people what we actually enjoy,
Yeah.
right? I often use the example of meals. Let's say you want to have a good meal with another person, right? Metaphor here. Right. So let's say we want to share a
Mhm.
good, enjoyable meal. We want to have dinner together. We want it to be, really, really, fulfilling for both of us. We want to leave both feeling happy, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to do that and I said, Delwyn, what do you want to eat? And you tell me all of the things that you don't like. You're like, okay, well, I don't like onions and I don't like pickles and I don't eat Thai food and I don't eat, anything with cilantro. And like, yes, it's really important to be really clear if there are a lot of no's, but if you never give any yeses, it
Mm,
puts so much responsibility on the other person to
mm,
create your whole experience and hope
mm,
that it's going to
mm,
be good
mm,
for you.
mm, mm, mm. That's
Right.
such
But
a
from that
great
list, I
point.
could give you a spring roll or I could give
Yeah.
you a pizza.
Right.
Those are very different experiences, right? Like you could have just like lettuce, with like some sea salt on it, right? Or
Yeah.
I could make you a steak,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Okay. So all the daters out there, if you want some juicy meals, then we have to be able to share the
Yep.
yeses and the nos. The
Yes.
both are
Mhm.
very important. That's such a great point. So those are some of the things that we should definitely talk about. What about meaning of sex? Like, I know, earlier you mentioned sex means different things to people. And, when I have sex, I don't know, maybe I have this expectation that now we're exclusive or now we're actually, committing to a long-term relationship. Not everyone has that definition or association about sex with that particular definition. So is it important to talk about what sex means to each person before having sex?
Absolutely, because again, we're moving on a lot of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that without having that information up front, we also might make choices that don't actually align with what we're trying to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That if we're not in communication about what this might mean for both of us or how we, want to consider sex, or, if I'm coming in with expectations, the only way that I can ensure that my expectations are met without being
Mm-hmm.
manipulative is to actually talk about it with the other person, right? An expectation that we don't discuss is just a hope, just
Mm-hmm.
something that we're hoping for. And while I love for us to have hope, I love hope. It helps motivate us forward. A lot of folks are really resistant to the idea of disappointment. Most of us have pretty poor skills around navigating what it feels like to be disappointed, especially in the context of dating. Disappointment can feel like rejection,
Mm-hmm.
right? It can feel like, oh, I'll never meet someone, or nobody is really interested in me, or I'll never find the relationship that I want, right? That if we go in with expectations that we don't talk about, we are default setting ourselves up for disappointment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
disappointment is a natural part of our experience of wanting things. Disappointment is
Right.
totally normal. You're going to encounter it, but you can really, really set yourself up for more success by being really thoughtful and communicative around, hey, I'm hoping that once we have sex, that might mean that we can have another conversation about what our relationship status is, right? Or I only have sex with people who I am planning on being exclusive with. Right? Like even just naming it doesn't always have to be a question, although questions can be helpful. What do you think of sex? Or does sex mean the relationship status changes? Right? Like questions can be helpful.
Yeah.
But I actually really encourage people, especially people who are socialized as women, because women are often taught to date in a way that gives like next to no information, right? Even when they're dating other women, right? That they're sort of encouraged to like date and flirt by not taking a definitive stance on anything. Right. So what do you think? Right. What do you want? How do you see this? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
Right. And, while the passivity might feel like it helps the relationship move forward, it also might mean that the relationship is moving forward without your sense of agency, without you actually creating what you want it to be. You're just sort of being swept up with just going along with whatever the other person or people might want from you. And so I really encourage, especially people who are socialized as women, to be thoughtful about like, what is it that I actually want? And then name that in specific. What am I expecting? And then name that in specific. So the other person also has a chance to say yes or not yes, or maybe, or I don't understand that, or let's talk about that some more.
Right. I love that because, the last point that you raised about giving the other person the opportunity to respond. If we don't communicate what we want, they wouldn't really know what we really want. And so, the relationship is going to go somewhere, like whether you shape it or not, it's moving to a certain direction. And I see, I think it's unfortunate when it moves forward in a way that we don't really actually want, but mostly because of lack of communication and not because of any other, mean or bad intentions. And so we can all, I think, help each other by asking questions. Of course, we could be asking questions and soliciting information as well, and also volunteering information. Like sharing what the yeses and the nos. I think that's really important point. And so I want to get into the communication part because that seems to be like a really critical thing. But before we move on, just one last question: the timing part. So one of the I've heard this advice of few times from different dating coaches for daters who are looking for long-term relationship. I've heard advice that says, hey, try not to rush into having sex, or at least like try to not have sex like longer than you think you should or like you might want. Because, sex is a biological phenomenon. And when you have orgasm, you release oxytocin, and just the whole kind of the act of it creates attachment. And when you attach to somebody too early, then of course, there's a lot of chemistries going on in our brain. It's hard. It makes it harder for us to clearly think about, hey, is this person actually a good partner for me in the long run? Because I'm already like so attached to this person. So to avoid that, try to like not have sex for, longer than you think. What do you think about that advice?
Yeah, I think a few simultaneous things are happening in that advice. I think it can be, well-intentioned and protective, but I think it's based on a number of, one, myths. I think two, it's based a lot on a gendered hierarchy, right? Like people socialized as men, like are not being told that, right? Like, people aren't saying men like, oh, like hold off before having sex because you're going to get attached, right? That's right. That's information that's only given to anyone who looks like a woman. Right. So there's some gender biasing there, some policing of bodies there. But then also, I think that it also comes from like a kind of sex negative place. This idea that like sex is something that needs to be like controlled. Like, yes, there are, of course, risks in sex because there's risks in every layer of emotions. But maybe I'll center my response around what oxytocin is and how that works, right? You named oxytocin and, attachment. So there's this, widespread myth that like oxytocin, like once it's released, like boom, you're attached, like you're bonded, right? I felt cuddly, I felt good, and now it's right, and now here we are. But what that misses is really all of the nuance of context factors, all of the depths of our personalities and our needs and our priorities, right? If that were by default true, like you would fall in love with yourself every time like you masturbated, right? Like, right? Like you'd pull out like your favorite toy.
Interesting.
Right? You'd like pull out your favorite toy and like never need like any romantic or social contact ever again, because you're like, I love you. You are everything I need in the world. I'm attached and bonded to you. Right? Like when I say it like that, like people are like, oh, okay, like I see how that might not work, right? Oxytocin, most of our neurochemicals, most of our hormones are really poorly understood. And this isn't coming from like a holier than thou perspective. I'm really nerdy and my background is in neuroscience. So I just recognize that so much of the data feels really compelling. But none of the early studies have been replicated in terms of like oxytocin as like this attachment hormone. What it seems like oxytocin actually does is it draws our attention more deeply into sort of the nuances of our social relationships. So when we play with oxytocin in the lab, we start to see that we pay more attention to whether or not I can trust this person. We start to see that like if I'm already in a relationship, I'm less likely to, have eyes that are wandering other places, right? In one study, people were actually maintaining more personal space from other attractive people. So they still said other people were attractive, but like, kept more of like a social distance from them as some, like, some space creation, right? So oxytocin can actually make us more attentive to things that don't work in our relationships.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Can cue us differently into empathy. So it's a facilitative hormone rather than like, this makes you fall in love with people. And so I know that I went really specific on the neurochemical, but I just want to use that as a way to segue back into the advice that you should, avoid having sex with people because the oxytocin is going to just hook you and then you're stuck. I want to invite us into more agency than that and allow people to remember that you still, make choices. Right. And so, the release of oxytocin in the moment can feel really, really soothing, really cuddly, really good, right? Can make us feel maybe settled or safe or attached in the moment.
Right.
And we still have all of our other faculties still present. And so it's important for us to continuously be checking in on like, okay, so what do I want here? What feels good to me in this moment? And what information am I actually getting from this other person about whether or not they're going to participate in co-creating the relationship that I am hoping for?
Yeah. That's a really interesting point about oxytocin that I haven't heard before. So thanks for sharing that. Maybe this is like this is based on my personal experience. I'm genuinely asking because I'm curious myself.
Yeah.
And perhaps because I was socialized as woman and was brought up as that. And my personal experience with sex, having sex, sex is that when I do engage in sex with a partner, because it's such a it feels like such a vulnerable act that it does create a lot of like nervousness. And I don't know if it's, maybe this is nothing to do with oxytocin. Like, I guess expectation as to like, oh, okay, this relationship is like now something else. So I think that personally did make it a little bit hard for me to be myself in the relationship. I mean, definitely had an impact on how I kind of showed up and the expectation that I had on the other person. And so I part of me is wondering like if the advice of like, hey, the timing on sex kind of comes from that. What do you think about that?
So sex has different meanings for us. Right? We have sexual attitudes, we have sexual beliefs, we have sexual values, we have sexual feelings.
Mm.
Right? And all of that gets wrapped up into other things about how we build relationships. When do I feel comfortable and confident? What makes me feel grounded? What makes me feel affirmed? What helps me trust? Right. And so all of those things are intermingled. So it's not as easy as like, this is what we have to do in sex, and this is what we have to do for our relationships. All of that is intertwined. And so, yeah, the more you get to know yourself, the better you have an understanding of like, okay, like, what is it that I'm looking for? What is it that I'm wanting? What is it that I'm needing? What helps me feel comfortable? What helps me feel confident? What do I do with my vulnerability? Because, right, like relating to other people can be vulnerable, right? But whatever meanings we have around sex is absolutely going to impact what we do. It's going to impact how we feel.
Yeah.
It's going to impact how we continue to think about sex, right? So
Right.
if you were told that like sex is just for fun, it doesn't actually mean anything, people just want to have sex, right? That if that was what you were taught and told all the way, right, all the way through development and early on, that would shift some of this, right? In the way that like people who grew up in like big families, and you know, the idea is just like, you know, people are just around all the time, right? That like those people might have an easier time being in crowds and networking, right? And being in large groups and not really thinking anything of it, versus like if you have a small family and like people can't just pop up at your house, right? That like meeting new people might feel more significant. You might feel more, you know, more vulnerable than if you're really used to people being around. Your sense of vulnerability is different, right? And so all of that ebbs and flows, all of that fluctuates for all of us. And so I say all of that to just name that it's going to be really personal. And so that's why I continue to invite people back inwards. I know that, you know, most folks listening will want, like, Shadeen, just tell us what to do.
What's the formula?
Right? Everyone wants the equation.
Yeah.
But really, the process does start with getting to know you. That is the only way that we can build any other information forward. Right? It's, you know, my work is really biased by how do you feel?
Right.
Right. And this is, you know, in my tagline, you know, I'm a bit of a sailor, you know, I can have, you know, socially a potty mouth, you know, brand wise, it's incredibly important, in alignment with the work that I do. Like I say fuck a lot. Like as a sex therapist, that's not like untoward. It's like professional, it's jargon. Right? You know, it's work terminology like synergy.
Right.
Spreadsheets, like fuck is like part of my work vocabulary. Right, but a thing that I end up saying often to folks is that like everyone wants to know how to fuck, but my work helps you remember how to feel. Because what we're actually looking for in our sexual experiences are a set of feelings. You are wanting sex to make you feel a particular type of way, right? And there's bodily feelings, so like physical sensations, but also there is some other layer of feeling. There is a way that you want to experience yourself in the world. I want this person to see me this way, or I want to be treated this way, or I want to see myself this way. Right. So I want to feel powerful. I want to feel loved. I want to feel important. I want to feel special. I want to feel humiliated. I want to feel degraded. I want to feel dominant. I want to feel submissive. I want to feel excited. I want to feel surprised. I want to feel curious. Right. Like whatever the feelings are, that's going to be really important for us to get really clear on. Because without that information, we're really just grabbing at things. Or maybe I'm going to do missionary. Maybe I'm going to pull out some ice cubes. Like maybe I should stand on my head. Right? Like, right? And all of those could be great. All of those could be great. But until you have a sense of like, okay, like again, like what do I want? What do I actually want? Right? You know, and there's absolutely room for exploration and trial and error, right? But with the goal of discovering what you want, and what you want is more than an orgasm.
Right. Yeah.
Right? There's a deeper feeling, because an orgasm for pretty much everyone lasts less than a minute, right? For people with penises, we're looking at on average like 13 seconds, right? For people with vulvas, we're looking at like around like 30-ish seconds, right? So this is a lot of work for not a lot of time, right? So there's something deeper that you're trying to get out of this, right? Because a Pop-Tart took less time. or took more time. I mean, right? A Pop-Tart took more time.
That's so
right?
true.
It takes you about the same amount of time to open a bag of chips.
Yeah.
So, right? Like you could be doing
It's
literally anything
a lot
else
of work for that short amount of
for not, right? And I won't
experience.
call it like not a big reward because it can
Yeah.
feel really good. It can feel really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we want something more than that. We want
Right.
something more than just, physiological payoff,
Yeah.
of a few or several seconds, or maybe lots
Yeah.
of them.
Right.
Maybe you're a person who has multiples, and that's cool also.
Hmm.
Right? But you want something more than that.
Right. I love that. I love that. People want to know how to fuck, but really it's about how you
How
want
you
to
feel.
feel. And yeah, sex like is such a powerful mechanism to like take us there, right? Like to feel in such a
Mhm.
great, it could make us feel really amazing. It could also make us feel really shitty. Going back to the question of like on the timing, to just wrap that up, I think
Yeah.
what I got out of the conversation really is it's all personal. Like we really have to look inwards to know when is the right timing for us, because we all grew up differently. We all have different values. Sex means different things to, I shared what it meant to me. And probably that's why sex had such the particular impact that it had on me when I was dating. So it's very important for us to be aware of that. Like, I think that self-awareness, it just all begins there. And then we can use that information to determine what is the right actual step for timing for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful, summary and reflection of the journey that we took, the
Right.
journey that we took, starting with that question.
Right, right. Awesome. So then now I want to really get into the communication
Okay.
we talked about, because that is very important. And I know that, speaking for myself, like it wasn't an easy topic, and it still isn't an easy topic for me to talk about with my partner or my dates. And so for those of us who are like, I don't know, like maybe because we're shy or whatever, for whatever reason, just have a hard time bringing up the topic of sex, any recommendations or tips?
Yeah. I would invite us, if it feels like really big to talk to dates about sex, even to start having the conversation with yourself. Whether that's, if you're a person that can just like speak out loud to yourself, like I have many conversations with myself throughout the day, but also I'm a Gemini, so that's also on brand.
Mm-hmm.
But journaling, right? Journaling can be really helpful, right? Because oftentimes we have a hard time talking about things that we haven't thought a lot about, like we have
Mm-hmm.
feelings about, it might come up, but we haven't actually spent a lot of time in the material. And so now when it comes time to like have a conversation with another person face to face, right, or like screen to screen, all of a sudden we feel like put on the spot and like I haven't thought this through, and like am I saying this right, and do I really mean that? Like we can have lots of self-consciousness because it feels unfamiliar. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately there aren't always a lot of spaces where we can have casual and or intentional conversations around sex that aren't just like salacious or like jokes, right? That we don't always get to be very like vulnerable in the
Mm-hmm.
context of conversations around sex unless we're talking to a person that we are trying to negotiate sex with.
Mm-hmm.
So we can bring that back to ourselves and have some time just reflecting, maybe thinking some upfront about the kinds of things that you might want to know about yourself or know about another person or share with another person, and maybe how you might like to share it.
Right.
If you have relationships where it feels, comfortable to do so, like friendships, for example, friends are really great spaces to be able to do some of this with if you already have like some intimacy there, because we always think of intimacy with like romantic and sexual partners, but our
Mm.
friends also occupy a really important intimate space with
Mm.
us, or they can. And so maybe we have friends that might be open to talking about some of this stuff with us. Maybe we join forums or groups, because now that our lives are online, more and more things are actually searchable. These are conversations that have always been happening, but they might be easier to find on the different spaces that you might be hanging out, right? So, Clubhouse and, Discord and, maybe there's a Slack channel somewhere. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But that there might be spaces for you to have more opportunities to have this conversation. And as you do that, I would love to just invite the reframe that like sex itself is not actually a taboo topic.
Mm-hmm.
It feels taboo because we don't talk about it.
Mm.
Right? That like sex as a conversation feels really hard because for most of us, we haven't gotten to have the conversation without judgment, without shaming, with accurate, medically accurate information. Like we most of us have not had the opportunity to have that.
Right.
Right. But what we really just are doing is talking about another piece of our life.
Yeah.
We share all sorts of things about ourselves. We share like our early childhood traumas. We share our fears. We share our like embarrassing, like middle school stories, right? So sex, what we're doing is actually talking about pleasure,
Yeah.
right? You are really just talking about all of the layers of what it would mean for you and this other person to feel good together.
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Mm-hmm.
have some of that reframe in mind, it might make it feel a little bit more accessible
Yeah.
to have this conversation because like I'm not talking about some like seedy back alley scary thing, right? I'm just talking about feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
talking about how we can feel good.
Yeah, I totally resonate with the point that you make about how it's not a taboo subject in itself, but just the unfamiliarity of it makes it really uncomfortable. And that totally was the case for me. I mean, I grew up in Korea, never talk about sex. And now I feel, I mean, because I just talked about it a lot. So now I feel completely comfortable to talk about it. So it's just, it wasn't like, it's definitely changeable, trainable, and almost reminds me of this movie where in the sex education class, like the teacher was like, repeat after me, vagina, vagina, vagina. Everybody says vagina, vagina, vagina,
Yeah.
just to make it comfortable for people to be able to talk about things like vagina and sex and all that. And so the more, whether you're like journaling or talking to yourself, those are great tips. Like, I think the more we can, bring it to our awareness and practice talking about it, like even just saying it out loud, that definitely would be very helpful.
And I think it leaves enough room, right? Because we absolutely, we have talked jokingly about like, being formulaic, right? That it in us practicing having conversations with ourselves already, it also gives us enough room to add our own style, add our own flair, be our own person. Because like I recognize, especially like I'm super nerdy, I'm Canadian, right? Like millennial, right? Like I am a very particular person. And so like, yes, even through my clinical training, like I could say like, this is what to say, but if that doesn't feel good to you, if that doesn't feel natural for you, if that doesn't feel right for you, you're not going to build more comfort. Right. Now you're just going to be speaking off of a script. And like, let's say you get the word placement wrong, right? Like, or like not everyone's good at ad-libbing. So if you like memorize this, script to say, you're probably not developing your comfort.
Right.
You might be very trusting in me and like, thanks. Right. Like, oh, Shadeen said, this is what you have to say. But if that doesn't actually resonate with you, or isn't actually language that makes sense for the people that you are sleeping with, right, then it probably won't work. It probably doesn't work. And so I really want to empower us to reclaim agency over our bodies. Right, that because we live in this larger shame-filled culture, right, and where there isn't information about sex, there isn't information about bodies and how they work. The more that I can instill in people that this will really start with you, right, digging deep, right, you getting information and then sharing that with other people in conversation. That's how we actually reclaim our right to pleasure. And that's how we actually start to overcome a lot of these external shaming messages, past traumas, current insecurities, anxieties about the future, right? By us in the present, really organizing ourselves to attend to what is it that I want? What is it that I need? What helps me feel safe? What helps me feel pleasure? What are my yeses? What are my nos? And so as we think about like how to communicate, right, it starts with, again, getting clear with yourself and practicing.
Yeah.
Right. We have the conversation, By having the conversation. I know that
Yeah.
sounds so circular, right? But
You have to
it starts
start
by
somewhere.
naming.
Yeah.
It
Hmm.
starts by naming,
Yeah. Yeah.
putting your curiosity into words
Right.
and
Right.
having some of those conversations more often.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know that our daters learn well by examples. And so I'm wondering if we could kind of, again, like don't, not the wording and the conversation has to feel right
Yeah.
for you, but I think we can all learn from kind of examples. Let's say I'm somebody, I've started dating someone and we're starting to get intimate, like physically, sexual, but actually I don't really feel comfortable with the speed at which we're moving. And so I want to share that with my partner. I feel nervous because, of course, I don't want to be judged, and I'm not really used to talking about sex. Or so. Could you kind of, for our listeners, maybe demo how I would actually set my boundaries and vocalize that?
Yeah. Can we actually work it together in real time?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to start. So this is some of how I might talk about this either in a workshop or, with clients. So I would start by, in the same way that I shared with everyone, I'd ask you, well, what do you actually want?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I heard you say that, okay, it's moving kind of fast for you.
Yeah.
Like what
Yeah.
do you want?
I really like this person. And
Mhm.
so I don't want him to think that I don't like him, but I don't know. I just am not, I don't want to be physical right now. I don't feel comfortable yet.
What would you like to do instead?
Um, I want to get to know him more. Like I want to just talk through things more. I want to learn more about him as a person. Um, just enjoy, like create more memories, like, but that doesn't have to be physical. Just, I guess, like maybe build more intimacy and trust in non-physical manner first until I feel comfortable.
Yeah. You start to lead there at the end. I want to push it a little further. How would that make you feel? Right. If you were to, be spending more time, like getting to know one another and building trust, how would that make you feel?
Safe, like safe. I think because for me, being physically involved with somebody is significant. Like I want to make sure that I like know that I'm in a maybe special place in his mind. In this relationship is something special before we actually move forward to forward too much physically. So that sense of assurance, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is just a start. Here are some things that I heard you say. Hey, I really like you,
Mm-hmm.
and I want us to spend more time getting to know each other. It'd feel really good to me to continue to build trust with you and build intimacy with you, and so I would really like it if we could put a pause on sex, right, for us to create more memories and more experiences first, right? That really helps me feel really safe and really trusting. I want to make sure that this is right because sex actually feels very important to me, and I like you enough that I want to actually see what this could look like, what this means.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that you led with, I really like you, because one thing that I shared is that I think a lot of us have fear of like, if I'm like, okay, can we pause this? Then the other person's going to think that I don't like them or something, right? And so, you led with something really positive, which is like, I really like you. And I'm having this conversation because I really want this to go somewhere. And I think I would imagine like vocalizing that actually makes it easier for me to express, but can we actually pause on the physical part a little bit?
Right. And so what I want folks to hear and notice is that what you want isn't a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't want us to think of our boundaries or our no's or our shifts or our redirections or our course corrections as like negative things. Because then we get really, hesitant to share. And then I'm just so concerned. And we, don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, even though ultimately, like, our safety and well-being has to mean more than the other person's ego. Right. But we want to be good, right? We want to be compassionate. We want to be caring. Maybe I really am interested in this person. I don't want it to go away. Right. But what we are sharing is important information. This is important relationship building information. So it's not a negative thing. And so we don't present it as if it's a negative. And it's not like, eliminating that other people might not be like hurt or disappointed by it. We can't control that.
Mm-hmm.
People are allowed to feel how they feel about what it is that we are stating, naming, asking for, doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we don't actually have to show up like feeling like, oh, I can't share this because it's a bad thing. What you're saying is, I like you enough that I want to really feel safe with you.
Right.
Like that's significant.
Yeah.
Right. You're saying, I want to go deeper with you. I want to build with you. I want more with you.
Yeah.
Right. That's all great stuff. And I didn't add any of that.
Right.
Right. And so I want to invite people to hear that, like, I used your words.
Mm-hmm.
I started and got the worry out the way, because that always distracts us, right? I'm worried that, they're not going to like me anymore, or that they're going to think that I don't like them. So I tend to lead with the worry part and just get it out. Like, I don't want you to think this, and we can't control that. If they're going to think that, they're going to think that, but we can at least, but we can at least let them know that's not our intention, or that's not what I want you to hear.
Right.
What I want you to hear is this. And so I'm making a request for what I want.
Yeah.
Right. What I want is a relationship with you. I want to go deeper with you. And so the request is for us to slow down this other thing and reprioritize.
Yeah.
Right. Something else. And so it was important. And I was intentional about asking you what you want.
Right.
Because that's what you're actually asking for.
Yeah.
How it happens is slowing down. What you want is to go deeper.
Right. And I love this because, this kind of what you kind of demonstrated and, kind of emphasizing what we want, we can apply it to any situation, whether that is like, okay, I want to slow down, or I actually want to be more physical with you, or, you earlier, you mentioned, like we're already having sex, but there are certain things that I want more of, or I want less of, whatever that is. I want more sex, or I want less sex, or I want this position. Like you could actually use this technique, just kind of tuning into what we're actually wanting and kind of leading with that. I think it could apply to any kind of conversations like those examples, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So you're having sex and you want to change something, right? One way we can name that, especially if you're like worried that it's going to like take sex off the table, or like, there's parts that are good, but things that you're like, oh, that doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
Right. That we can absolutely name it such that I really love the way that you always initiate and like have lots of eye contact. I'd like to try something different. Right. Like instead of us starting in the bed, I would really love for us to try starting in the kitchen. That sounds really exciting to me. And I've been thinking a lot about trying that with you.
Yeah.
And I'm, curious if you're interested in that. Right. Like,
who would want that? Who would want to hear that?
Right, when we are making requests, we are giving people, especially when they are actually tied to like things we want or need, we are giving people opportunities to participate in pleasure with us.
Yeah.
Right. This is an opportunity. And so I want us to think of it that way. We are giving an opportunity. These vulnerable spaces, when I am opening up some vulnerability by making a request, it is an opportunity for someone to meet my needs. Right? It is an opportunity for someone to participate in helping me feel good. Yeah. And they are welcome to say no, because this is a consent, right? Yeah. So we only want people to do things for us when it actually feels good to them. We don't want people to be doing things that they're going to harbor resentment or bitterness, or that's going to harm them, or that we feel like we've tricked them or forced them to do it. We want people to say, yeah, right? Like, oh, that sounds interesting. Or like, yeah, sure. Right? Like, yeah. Right. We want people to agree to participate. And so so by offering it, people can lean in and say like, okay, like, yeah, let's do it in the kitchen. Or actually, the kitchen kind of freaks me out. But there's like knives and stuff in there, the salmon, but like, what about in the car?
Right. They can propose like something else that might work for you and them, Yeah.
And now we have a whole conversation. Right. Now we are 2 people sharing what would please us, or 3 people, or 5 people. Right. I don't know how you get down. Yeah. Right. But just do what feels good. Right. Yeah. And so, the more we can be really thoughtful about what both doesn't and does work for us, then we can have these really, right, meaningful conversations that can lead to either, some tangible, concrete opportunities, things for us to explore and try, or enough information for us to acknowledge what at least is not going to work.
Right.
Because since we're dating and getting to know people, we might also come across places where we're like, oh, this is an incompatibility, or this will not work for us, or I do not like this, or this does not feel negotiable, right? That we also want and need that information.
Right.
As we're exploring how we connect to people.
Yeah. I love this. And I know what conversation I'm going to have tonight with my partner. Yeah. That's right. One more question on this topic. I think there is also like this fear of judgment, right? Especially if I don't know, like if what we want is considered, again, taboo, like, or even more quirkier than just the sex itself, like I'm really into S&M. Bringing up things like that just feels really vulnerable. And of course, it's going to be hard because I'm afraid that I'm going to be seen a certain way. Any recommendations on how we could navigate that better?
Yeah. So first is, nerdy information. So normal is just frequency data. Right. So how frequently we, have heard something or know about something. So probably if you're feeling abnormal, you just probably haven't encountered it enough. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that you're the only one. I believe you that you are a unique and beautiful, special snowflake. And for whatever you're into, I promise there is an entire community of folks.
Right.
Who are into the same thing, right? That I have yet to encounter a kink that is so kinky that nobody else has ever thought of it ever.
Yeah.
Right? Like you might like yours in a very particular way that is specific to you, but keeping in mind that there's like approaching like 8 billion people on the planet, right? And that we've been here for a little while, right? Like think about with movies, like it's really hard to create a story that like has nothing to do with anything anyone has ever thought of before. Right. So whatever fantasy you have in your head, there is precedent for it.
Right.
However, it might not be the right fit for this person. And quite often what people are reacting to more than like what you think or what you want is bad, dirty, and wrong. They're reacting to their own shock. Right? Their own surprise. Because again, we have so few conversations and so few vulnerable conversations around sex that we are often just taken by surprise. And so a lot of the times when I see couples in my office around like disclosures like this, a lot of the times the person who maybe reacted in like a shaming or judgmental way is actually incredibly repentant. Right. But like we're already, bruised, right? Because our worst fear is confirmed. We're always worried that we are bad, we are wrong, we are unworthy. Right. And so for us to at least just know that even if whatever I'm proposing might not be the thing that turns my partner on, but it's still okay for me to want it as long as it is consensual and not causing anybody harm right? So that's separate from like pain, for example. People can consent to something that is intense physically, right? But we need people, we can only participate in experiences that are consensual. So whomever is involved has to have informed consent. Right. So they have to understand what's happening. They have to be, of sound mind enough to be able to say yes or no. Right. If whatever you're interested in meets those criteria, then it's fine. It just might not be for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'll say some controversial things in this moment. Like I'm really iffy about chocolate. Like I like a brownie. I'll like do like cookies like with some chocolate chips, but like you're not going to pass me like a bar of chocolate. Like I don't want that. I don't like bananas. I really only like either like horrifically like pretentious pizza, like pizza that will only call itself like a flatbread, or like really horrible pizza. Like I won't name names because I'm not sponsored by anybody, but like right, but like all of the pizzas that you're like like the hot and ready, like takeout pizza. You know what pizzas I'm talking about? Like the like single bill, like give me a medium pizza, like cheese with like next to no sauce, like right. So like there are things that we like that are very particular to our tastes, right? I like that thing like covered in like a creamy garlic sauce. You can throw some eggplant on there, like right, like very particular tastes. All of us have things like that. Even if you are a person that like really just likes oatmeal with like 1 tablespoon of sugar, if that's your jam, that's your jam. We're not always going to have the same palates. We're not always going to want the same things at the same time. Maybe someone says, I've never had that before and I want to try it, and they try it and they're like, no. Right, maybe they try it and they're like, okay, like you can have yours with the onions, but like I want my onions on the side. Right, like again, it's a negotiation. But what I don't want us to walk away with feeling, even if someone projects this, that's from their own stuff, but I don't want you to walk away feeling like, oh, I'm not allowed to like what I like. What I like is bad. What I like is dirty. What I like is wrong. It's just not to this person's taste. And that's okay. That can be okay.
Right. And I think just being, I mean, the first point that you brought up, which is like, no matter how rare, like in your view, whatever your liking is, there is a community. I mean, you're not alone, like for sure. Yeah. So that's really good to, something to remember. And also, you know, we cannot control other person's reaction. And even if it was like in a shaming bad way, like, to your point, they're really reacting to their own set of beliefs and their own, like their own, you know, upbringing and all that probably baggages that they have, like we all do, versus kind of to what you just shared. So those are really great points to remember. If I wanted to bring up, like, is there anything I can do to make it easier for me to bring up something like this to my date when I'm feeling really nervous and I don't want to be judged? Just vocalizing, like, should I just vocalize it? Like, any tips there?
Yeah, so we might get a little meta. I love a good meta conversation, right? So like, how do you feel about conversations about sex, right? So we can ask questions, like we can ask questions in advance of giving the information. So we ask them, you know, how do you feel about conversations about sex? Or, you know, do you ever talk about fantasies, or do you ever think about fantasies, or do you have any fantasies that you ever worry about sharing, right? Like, right, if someone wanted to share something with you, you know, that you never heard before, it doesn't have to be specific to sex. We can broaden it out, right? Like, you know, like let's say someone like gives you some like hot tea, like, you know, some like juicy information, like, you know, what are you going to do with it? Right. Like right. Like we can have conversations about what it is that we're worried about, not like mining or, you know, to be sneaky, but to be able to talk about what kinds of reactions we might be hoping for. So they share whatever they share. And if that's cool, you know, then we might move forward. If it's like not great, you might name, like, it feels really important to me. Like if I was to share something with you, like I would want you to, you know, say, I would want to get a response like this, or I would not like it if you did that, or like, right. Or whatever the case may be. Right. So we can be a little bit meta. I also want to plug, Mickey Woods is a sex educator who created a game called Sex Talk that I think is just a really lovely addition to folks' arsenal. I know there's all sorts of conversation cards, and we've probably seen, you know, lots of different, you know, like conversational talk decks, right? Sort of sentence completion type of cards. I like this one because it's, you know, geared towards sex and sort of escalates in intensity. So if you're like, I am not trying to talk about, you know, what I want to put in my butthole, right? So like, if you're like, that's not where I want to start, right? That there are questions that can build you up to something more graphic. And if you don't want to get there, then you don't have to get there. So it's called Sex Talk. You know, I'm plugging it because I think it can be a helpful tool for folks. And because it's like a card deck, it's not intimidating. It can feel kind of like a game, or you can have it and the other person doesn't know that you have it because you might be digital. And so you like read the question and bring it up later. Right. Or you can go back and forth, right? That you can sit down and actually ask each other both of the questions. So everybody has to answer. And it's not like on you, like, oh, like, I can't believe you asked me that. It's like, it's not my fault. Like, Dex made me do it. Right? But if we need a little bit more sort of, emotional distance from, the potential intensity of the conversation, we can also have tools.
I love that. Thank you for those tools. And, I think one of the tips that I give out often is just kind of like very similar to what you said, naming your emotion whenever we have actually something difficult for us to say. I think just even prefacing it by saying like, hey, this is something that's really hard for me to share, or I'm afraid that I'm gonna, maybe you'll judge me, but I still want to share this with you. I think kind of vocalizing that and naming that, like you said, also can make the conversation easier. Oh my gosh, Shadeen, this has been so fun. Like I usually keep it under 1 hour, but I just couldn't stop asking questions. So thank you so much for all those like really concrete tips. I think I definitely learned so much from this conversation. One question I ask every Save the Date guest: what is the best dating advice you've ever received?
Oh, the best dating advice I've ever received. Ooh, that's a good one. I'm like going through like my mental catalog. Not because I've like received like so much. I'm trying to think of like what was actually good.
One of the better ones.
Yeah, one of the better ones. Yeah, because I truthfully didn't listen to most of it. I've gotten a lot of questionable advice. Yeah, like one of the earliest pieces of advice I can remember, it wasn't good. It was like, oh, like don't date athletes, even though like I was an athlete. and then I married, like the college.
Yeah, so many rules like that, right? Oh my god.
Yeah. And
maybe it's like don't listen to those rules.
Yeah, right. Don't listen to those. No, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I have gotten wasn't necessarily given to me in specific, right? But it was literature out in the world. But how do I condense this into something that is short? So the work of Audre Lorde, right, it has been really impactful for a lot of people, including myself. And the idea that taking care of yourself is radical and necessary, right? This premise that it's not frivolous, right, for us to practice self-care. And Audre Lorde, activist, scholar, feminist, was not talking about self-care in like the bath bombs, get a haircut, like new dress, sort of way, but talking about self-care and like really, really paying attention to what your soul, spirit, body needs. Position that as like radical and transformative was really, really powerful for me to hear kind of early on as, a people pleaser, as a person who really worried a lot about rejection, as a person who had a lot of like, sort of underlying anxiety about the social world. And it was really meaningful for me to have like concrete position or permission, I should say, concrete permission to really center myself as I seek to connect with others, that by centering with myself, I actually change the world, right? That if I take good care of me, I can then be more available and more present in our relationship, and not like I have to take care of me so I can take care of you better. It's like taking care of me is enough. Right. You're good enough.
Yeah.
And so that was really meaningful.
What a beautiful advice, not just for dating, but for life in general. Thank you so much for sharing that. Shadeen, so if this has been a great conversation, I'm sure a lot of daters want to keep in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing. How do they stay in touch with you? And, if there are any work that you kind of want to share with them that you think would be good for them to check out?
Yeah. So like most people, I have a website, shadeenfrancis.com. That's sort of the hub. I use my Instagram to sort of share brain blasts that I have every blue moon. But also I will, post like links and shares to things that are upcoming, behind the scenes of things that maybe people weren't able to go to, maybe things that are like private events. Another really cool space that I am is an app called Mind, MINED. The website is doyoumind.com. So Mind is the first emotional wellness app. And so what it is a handful of health and wellness experts, myself included, create live content on the app. We are there. All of us, I think, are there like twice a week. I'm there twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. We have an ongoing series where we provide like ongoing education. So like right now I'm doing like a sex toy tour. So I'm like breaking down different sex toys on the market and helping people like understand how sex toys work, pick things that might be good for their bodies. Maybe if there are, challenges or barriers that you might be facing or things that you want to experience in your sex life, I'm giving you options and opportunities without the shame. I want you to have fun. And what tools are for play, and so I want you to have a good time. So in doing that, but all of us also have like a series where we are really just talking to the audience. So I do a weekly Q&A where folks submit me a question and we talk about it. It's live. It's currently free. And so if you're interested, you can download the app and follow me. Again, it's Mind. So Mind is the name of the app. doyoumind.com is the website. You can also link to that through my Instagram and through my website.
Great. Guys, let's go check it out. It sounds like a really amazing resource. And as always, a lot of resources that she didn't mention, including some of the work that she just mentioned here, is going to be posted on coffeemeetsbagel.com's blog, coffeemeetsbagel.com/blog. So please check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Thank you, Shadeen, once again for sharing your wisdom. Super helpful. And everyone, I'll see you in 2 weeks.